Well, the first John Wick was kind of a runaway success, so of course they had to do a sequel, and this one, well, it definitely steps it up. John Wick Chapter 2. Now, John Wick Chapter 2 came out in 2017, and again is the story of John Wick, played by Keanu Reeves. He's a hitman, he's part of this underground agency. He got out, but now back in, and we pick up really where the last movie left off. He's kind of wrapping things up that we really didn't get to see at the end of the first one. We know that he got revenge on his dog and he took on the Russian mafia, and that was all exciting. But we never really did get closure on his car, and this movie opens with him getting his car back. And he gets his car back pretty easily. He takes out a lot more Russians, and it turns out that the car was in the shop of Vigo's brother. Vigo, the Russian from the last movie, his brother is in this movie. And right away, he is terrified of John Wick. He knows his reputation. So yeah, he kind of just rolls over. And yeah, he really doesn't stand much of a chance against John after what we just saw him do in the last movie. But even though John does get his car back, it is in rough shape. It gets messed up pretty bad, almost unrecognizably so. So he's got to drop it off at Aurelio's, and he'll see what he can do getting it fixed up. Maybe it'll be ready next Christmas. And once again, John Wick is retired. He's got a new dog now. He hasn't named him, which I think is an interesting note because he's still very detached because of Daisy, the dog that died. He doesn't feel like he can open up and name the dog. So this dog really has no name, but they seem to be having a nice simple life until the bad guy of the movie shows up kind of unexpectedly, and his name is Santino D'Antonio. He's this very high up guy in this underground criminal organization that everybody works for, and he did John Wick a favor to help him get out, so now John owes him one. And there's this marker that's sealed in blood that binds one soul to another. It's this agreement that cannot be undone. It's binding, and now he's looking to cash in on that favor because his sister, Gianna D'Antonio, has a seat at the table, and we don't really know what this high table is at this point. We get a little bit of a glimpse into it. Apparently it's a super high class, rich, influential organization of people in this mafia of sorts, and only certain people get in and have that influence. And Gianna has it, and Santino, he wants it, and so he wants John to take her out so then he can fill in that spot. And he does this very persuasively by burning down John's house when he refuses. So now John's homeless and vengeful again, and he wants Santino D'Antonio's blood. He's after him, but he can't kill him unless he does this favor and kills Gianna. And this takes him to Rome. And around this time you realize that the scale of this movie is definitely stepped up from the first movie. The first movie, very intimate, very specific story. It's very simple. It's a revenge quest, and it only takes place in this one city that is pretty clear at this point that it is New York City, although I'm pretty sure they still haven't name drop New York City as the city that all this takes place in. But given that they're going to Rome and that there's a Rome Continental, you can kind of assume that the Continental that Winston manages is the New York City Continental. But it is still very cool that John Wick is now on this globe-trotting adventure. We're in Rome. It's a beautiful city, a lot of great cinematography. There's a party happening in these ancient ruins. I'm sure somebody knows what it is. These ruins are not just random. I'm sure it's a real location room that I'm just not picking up on, but it is a location that kind of reminds me of the Red Circle nightclub from the first movie, just stepped up. The party's bigger, the people that attend are much richer. It's a very high-class event because, again, you got the high table people there, and John has to go in prepared because this is going to be a lot harder to infiltrate than the Red Circle Club was in the first movie. So he's got to suit up, he's got to gear up. And here we realize that not just the production design has increased in quality and budget, but also the action, the stunt work, the toys that they get to play with during the action scenes have also stepped up. Because in the first movie, it was pretty much just hand-to-hand combat, single pistol fighting, and a little bit of knife work. Here you have the knife work, you have the pistols, and you have the hand-to-hand, but you've also got assault rifle and shotgun. And you see John alternate between the three different guns as he infiltrates this party. And it's just so cool. And you can tell that Keanu Reeves really trained well with all these different types of guns, and that he looks proficient in this, that you can tell he put in the hours. There are very few actors in Hollywood that look this good and this qualified handling firearms. Keanu is just bringing next level discipline to his craft, and it is so much fun to watch. But when all the gunplay and fireworks subside, he is face to face with Gianna D'Antonio. She knows that he's there to kill her and that her brother is probably behind it. So to make it easier on John and herself, taking her life into her own hands, she slits her wrists and just dies. But for good measure, John shoots her in the head so that D'Antonio knows that he didn't shirk his responsibility. He saw the job finish, the markers completed, he's free. And free to have his revenge on the real D'Antonio that he hates and that blew up his house, and he's gonna go after him next. Except, in order to save face, Santino can't just let the murderer of his sister go away free, so he puts a hit out on John. And just like how in the first movie you have all these rogue agents trying to have their shot at John Wick, here we have it again, and it's a much wider contract, and you see a lot more different types of assassins. Again, this movie takes what we loved in the first movie and just steps it up a little bit. Let's see if we can do more. Let's see if we can push it a little bit further now that we have all the money that the first movie raked in to invest into this movie. But it's the pressure from all the assassins coming after him that actually drive John Wick underground, or I guess even more underground than this operation already was. Because here we have a new element of John Wick lore that we're introduced to in this movie. And it's not just the stuff with the high table. That's like the upper class expansion of what we got a little bit of in the Continental. But here we also get the lower class expansion of what this underworld is like. And that underworld of the underworld is embodied with Lawrence Fishburne's character. He calls himself a king. I'm gonna call him the Pigeon King because he is the eyes and ears of New York City. He's operating through all of the homeless people that are just on the subway, in the streets. He's got eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. His pigeons are sending messages to where nothing happens in New York City that he doesn't know about. And he sees that if he helps John out, New York City will be a bit more stable if Santino D'Antonio and his ambitions doesn't take over that area now that his sister's dead. So him and his resources partner with John for a little bit, and that thrusts us into the third act. And now he is going after Santino D'Antonio. But of course he's heavily guarded, and this brings us into this very creative action sequence with all these mirrors. It's this art museum exhibit, I think it's called Reflections. It's very artsy, but it does lend itself to some pretty expert level fight choreography and cinematography. Because if I've learned anything throughout my years of film school and any on-set experience, I've learned that reflective surfaces are the hardest conditions to shoot in, except maybe water. Water might be the hardest, but reflective surfaces are definitely a challenge because you want to hide the camera and hide the crew and hide everybody. And when everything is reflecting, it makes it very difficult. And I credit this team for pulling that off as well as they did because it looks phenomenal. But as good as John Wick is, and he does pretty efficiently dispatch all the bodyguards in this Reflections exhibit, D'Antonio does get away and he takes refuge in the Continental, so we get to see Winston again and Kayron and all the people that we got to know in the first movie. They're back, and per the rules, no business can be conducted on Continental grounds. And after Santino kind of rubs it in John's face that, hey, I could stay here forever, a year, multiple years, John isn't having any of that, and he shoots Santino in the face. What have you done? Because not only is his high table body count up to 2 now, and that's not going to go over very well with the rest of the high table, they're not going to like that very much. He also broke Continental rules by conducting business on the grounds, which makes him excommunicado. He can't use any of their facilities, and it just doubled the price on his head. So the movie ends on kind of a bittersweet note because John does get his revenge in the end, and you do sympathize. You're like, yes, that was probably the best move for the fate of the city and the world and the high table, because this dude definitely does not belong on the high table. He is the scum of the earth. He's too young, too ambitious, too prideful, all the things that make for a very messy transition as he becomes part of the high table. But at the same time, that means John Wick is on the run again, and so he's got to run. And the movie ends with him just running down the street with his dog as a lot of people just watch him go by and pull out their guns, getting ready to confront him. And we will see where that goes in the next movie, because you know, of course, there's gonna be a John Wick 3, because John Wick 2 made a whole bunch of money. And I gotta say, as a sequel that wasn't really planned or anticipated, this movie turned out pretty good. Although I will say it is probably the weakest of the franchise on a writing level, because the script is not that great. It's not that cohesive. It kind of meanders a little bit. But at the same time, it takes stuff that was already established in the first movie, like the Continental, like John Wick's retirement, like how the movie ended with him still needing to get his car back. And it does tie up those loose ends from the first movie while expanding on new ideas like the High Table, like the Pigeon King and his underground bum army, all the while setting John Wick up in opposition to this High Table, all these very high-class, hoity-toity assassin types. During this movie, you never get a sense that he is in the good graces of them, but at the same time, at least until the end of the movie, he's not an enemy of the High Table, and he's definitely not the kind of enemy that he will become later in the franchise. So really, I think this movie works best as a transition film. It transitions the franchise from a self-contained, isolated revenge quest about a dude that loved his dog into a much bigger and broader story of underground organizations, corruption, revenge, and this dude, John Wick, just taking a stand against all of it. And on top of that, the action's more ambitious, the production design is more ambitious, the staging of the various fight sequences are more ambitious, but it doesn't feel like they're going too far either. It's stepped up in ways that are commensurate with the way the story's going, with the way the escalation is happening, so of course you'd want things to step up in that regard. And this movie does that very well. So at the end of the day, I still had a ton of fun with John Wick Chapter 2. I'm excited to revisit Chapter 3, Parabellum, I think is what it's called. That title always kind of threw me off because, like, what is a parabellum? But I do remember that movie having much more specific and cool action sequences that I am so excited to talk about next week. But for now, I'll leave this video here. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about John Wick Chapter 2? Do you like it better than the first one? Do you think, like I said before, it might be the weakest story-wise? But whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is My Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.